Markets are crashing, CEOs are scrambling, and France is furious. The global economy is once again standing on the edge, not because of a virus, but because of tariffs. President Donald Trump has launched a new phase in his aggressive trade policy. This time, it's not just threats, it's action. He imposes tariffs on European exports, including a massive 20% levy on key sectors. In response, French President Emmanuel Macron is pushing back harder than ever, demanding an unprecedented freeze on all European investments in the United States. So what happens when economic weapons start flying across the Atlantic? Who stands to win or lose the most? In this video, we're breaking down the full story across 7 key chapters, from the shockwaves hitting the markets to the political power plays behind the scenes, to what it all means for businesses, investors, and you. Let's begin. The Liberation Day bombshell. On April 2nd, 2025, President Trump took the stage for what he called Liberation Day. It was more than a speech. It was the launch of a radical shift in U.S. trade policy. In a bold move, Trump announced that a 10% blanket tariff would be imposed on all imports entering the United States, effective immediately. But the biggest shock was reserved for America's longtime trading partners. The European Union, among others, would face even steeper tariffs, up to 20%, targeting high-value exports from steel to luxury goods. Trump framed the move as a necessary correction to what he called decades of unfair trade practices. He cited trade imbalances, national security concerns, and what he described as economic sabotage from foreign powers as the key motivations behind this aggressive stance. The market reaction was swift and brutal. Within hours, major U.S. indices plunged. The Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all fell by more than 5%. Confidence was shaken. Investors began pulling back, and across the Atlantic, European leaders scrambled for answers. Within 24 hours, the European Union called an emergency summit, and at the heart of the response was French President Emmanuel Macron, ready to retaliate. Macron's counterstrike, the investment freeze. As markets trembled and headlines exploded, President Emmanuel Macron delivered a measured but forceful response. He didn't just criticize Trump's tariffs, he fired back with a strategic economic threat of his own. In a historic and unprecedented move, Macron called for a freeze on European investments in the United States. From Paris to Berlin, he urged companies to pause capital flow into the U.S. economy, a direct counterstrike intended to match economic pressure with financial restraint. This wasn't just symbolism, it was designed to strike at the core of U.S. economic strength. Foreign direct investment, FDI powers everything from tech startups in Silicon Valley to massive auto plants in the Midwest. Cutting that flow sends a chilling message. Europe is willing to protect its interests with real financial firepower. Macron didn't stop there. He gathered business leaders, ministers, and European allies to push a unified front. His message was clear. Now is not the time for panic or fragmentation. No more acting alone. The only way to weather the storm and strike back effectively is together. Macron's call for an investment freeze wasn't just about symbolism. It was a calculated response to real, tangible damage. With tariffs now active, the next question is, who feels the pain first? Who gets hit first? Industries in the crosshairs. Let's look at the numbers. In 2024, the United States imported over $585 billion worth of goods from the European Union. Apply a 20% tariff to that, and you're not just raising prices, you're shaking the foundations of entire industries. The effects: higher costs, supply chain disruptions, and likely widespread layoffs. Some sectors are more exposed than others. Aeronautics is front and center. Airbus alone makes up nearly 18% of France's exports to the US, making it a prime target. If orders slow or prices spike, the ripple effects will be global. Next up, pharmaceuticals. Roughly 9% of EU-US trade sits in this sector, and it's especially vulnerable to pricing wars, where access to life-saving drugs and medical components becomes a costly political game. Then there's the crown jewel of French exports: luxury goods, wine, cognac, champagne. These aren't just products, they're cultural icons, and now they're caught in the crossfire. And that's not all. Electronics, automobiles, agriculture, and mining are all staring down the same barrel. With US tariffs now active, the viability of exports is in question. Contracts may dry up, production could slow. And we've seen this movie before. The last time Trump imposed targeted tariffs, specifically on selected French wines, exports plummeted by 25%. Now imagine that kind of blow, but multiplied across every key sector. What we're looking at isn't just friction, it's a full-blown trade iceberg drifting straight into the heart of Europe's biggest economies. The looming threat to key European industries wasn't just a political talking point, it triggered an immediate reaction from global financial markets. How global markets responded. Investors hate one thing more than bad news: uncertainty, and that's exactly what they got. The day after the tariffs were announced, markets responded with blunt force. The CAC index in Paris plunged over 3%, reflecting panic across European exchanges. On Wall Street, it was no better. US indices went into a tailspin, with the Dow and S&P both shedding significant ground in early trading. Major investment banks like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs began bracing for potential retaliation. Analysts warned that if European countries follow through on the investment freeze or impose countermeasures, it could trigger a freeze of their own on American financial influence abroad. While the West reacted with caution and concern, Asia saw an opening. With US-EU trade ties fraying, Asian markets began positioning themselves as cost-effective alternatives. Manufacturers from China, Vietnam, and India started quietly exploring new deals, hoping to absorb the trade volume caught in limbo. France, meanwhile, faces a deeper problem. With US trade representing roughly 1.5% of its GDP, any slowdown would hit more than the stock ticker. It could mean reduced government revenue, shrinking business profits, and real pain for workers in export-heavy sectors. And as one EU official dryly noted, no one escapes a trade war, some just bleed slower. The markets have spoken. The question now is whether policymakers are ready to listen or dig in further. The market chaos didn't just shake investors, it galvanized leaders. And while the financial world scrambled to stabilize, European officials began plotting their counterstrike. The EU's retaliation plan, phased and painful. Europe isn't just fuming, it's planning. The European Union wasted no time in announcing a structured, deliberate response to the US tariffs. A two-phase retaliation plan was unveiled, aimed at delivering economic pressure with precision rather than panic. Phase 1, set to launch in mid-April, will hit US steel and aluminum, a direct mirror of Trump's own tariff targets. It's a tit-for-tat maneuver meant to send a clear message: we can match your moves step for step. Phase 2 is where the stakes get higher. Expected to roll out later in the month, this wave will expand to broader tariffs on American consumer goods, services, and even tech imports. The goal? Make the economic pain visible and politically inconvenient for the US. France, taking the lead once again, has gone further, floating the idea of cutting public contracts with US firms. That could lock American businesses out of billions in European infrastructure and innovation projects. Meanwhile, Germany is quietly exploring new trade partnerships in Asia, looking to diversify away from the volatility of transatlantic relations. The EU's strategy is clear: contain the chaos, but stand firm. Macron's call for an investment freeze was never the endgame. It was the opening salvo. Now, the rest of Europe is picking up its weapons. Behind the politics, what this really means. The tariffs, the retaliation, the freezing of investments. On the surface, it's all about economics. But dig deeper, and you'll find something more powerful driving this conflict: narratives. For Donald Trump, this is about American resurgence. It's the latest move in a long-standing campaign to bring manufacturing back home, reduce reliance on foreign goods, and reframe the US as a nation that plays hardball in global trade. And with an election looming, it's also about messaging, telling voters that he's fighting for American jobs and taking bold action on their behalf. For Emmanuel Macron, it's about European independence. The goal isn't just to push back, it's to accelerate Europe's transition away from unstable partnerships. Macron wants to build a self-reliant economy, one driven by green innovation, digital sovereignty, and collective European strength. Standing up to the US plays into a broader vision, one where Europe doesn't follow, it leads. But for global businesses, this is panic mode. Across boardrooms in Paris, Frankfurt, and New York, CEOs are being forced into rapid reassessment. Should they reorganize factories to avoid avoid tariff zones, diversify supply chains to mitigate risk, put major investments on hold until the political dust settles. This isn't just a blip on the radar, it's not a passing disagreement. What we're witnessing is the beginning of a structural reset in globalization itself, where alliances shift, rules are rewritten, and the old assumptions about open trade no longer apply. The shifting narratives driving this trade war aren't just altering headlines, they're redrawing the map of global economics. And as leaders lean into nationalism and independence, businesses and citizens are left to wonder, where does this go from here? The road ahead, possibilities and perils. There are three realistic paths forward. First, the best case scenario, de-escalation through diplomacy. Both sides return to the table, negotiations restart, and tariffs are dialed back in exchange for mutual concessions. It's clean, it's stabilizing, but in the current climate, it's also the least predictable. Secondly, a prolonged cold economic war. Tariffs and investment freezes become the norm. Europe strengthens its ties with China and Asia, while the US doubles down on reshoring and domestic production. Alliances shift, and a new economic iron curtain begins to take shape, not with weapons, but with regulations and policy. Thirdly, the most dangerous route, a global recession. The escalating trade war triggers deeper market instability, forces central banks into emergency mode, and may push global leaders toward a coordinated reset, potentially even ushering in a modern version of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the post-W3 blueprint for global financial order. Whichever path emerges, one truth stands firm. This isn't just a squabble over tariffs, this is a geopolitical chess match for the future of economic power. So what does this mean for you? Expect higher prices, delays in products and services, political tension rebranded as economic reform. But more than that, expect to live in a world that's actively reshaping in real time. A world where investments aren't just financial, they're political, where tariffs aren't just taxes, they're warnings, and where leaders like Trump and Macron aren't just reacting to the world, they're redefining it. The trade war may be just beginning, but its consequences will be felt for decades to come.